Hi everyone. This is a correspondence game that I'm currently playing on chess.com against a lower rated opponent, and I wanted to go through a quick study as to how I research an opening position that I am unfamiliar with, especially when that opening position looks slightly suspect or bad. So my opponent just played f5 in response to a kind of oddball variation of the Terrace defense. The Terrace defense being knight d2 here. My opponent responded in a slightly unfamiliar way, and then we captured, and now he's trying to bump my piece out. And now it is my turn, and I have a lot of things to contemplate. So the very first thing I do when I see the move f4 is I think this move is bad. I don't know how bad it is. When you play correspondence games, you're not allowed to use computers of any kind. However, you are allowed to use books. I did a quick look through some of the books that I have on the Terrace defense, and I found nothing remotely related to the move f5 when I have a knight on e4. It's quite possible that I need to do a better search, but my book collection is not well indexed on OCR, so we're skipping that stage of this investigation. So we're going to look at the primary, we're going to look at candidate moves. We're going to start with the really off the wall stuff first. So, whenever I'm looking at the situation, the most obvious thing is that my knight is in trouble. So my knight is in trouble. There's a bunch of different places I could put my knight. So instead of actually looking at any of those places, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to contemplate what happens if I don't move my knight at all, because I'm a higher level chess player, and when you are looking to end games decisively, you need to make decisive moves. Sometimes you find those brilliancies by stretching the limitations of what you think might be good. So I'm going to make a couple of investigational options first by just ignoring my knight altogether, because I'm gonna, no matter what, I'm still gonna look at those knight options. I'm gonna look at those, and honestly, in this position, it looks pretty likely that I'm gonna end up moving my knight. But if you always start with the move that's the most likely to happen when you have 5 hours worth of time to resolve and take a look at the scenario, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, because you start hedging yourself in the direction of, oh, I need to move the piece that is being attacked, as opposed to, could I counterattack in this situation? Could I make an intermezzo move that threatens somebody? So the first thing that comes to mind is this move right here with the queen. This is just a simple check. Under different circumstances, this would be absolutely devastating. For instance, if my knight was here and was able to cover that g3 square, but queen h5 check, it doesn't look particularly good because my opponent blocks it with a single pawn, and now I have two pieces that are hanging, and that is no good. So yeah, we don't like that situation. Something else we could contemplate, however, is this bishop move. This bishop move coming out, and if we actually move into, I believe, notes or openings mode, it will allow us to display some of these on the board. Here we go. We're in notes mode or openings mode again on chess.com. So this is another move that I wanted to take a look at before I got into any of these various knight jumping around moves. We have our developing of the bishop. It's guarded by this knight, which is being held on pre, and it's attacking the queen. This is an interesting option. Our opponent essentially has a couple of options. They can either block with either the bishop or the knight. Technically, they can come back with that knight, but I don't think that one is a realistic move. If they block with this knight, I can capture, thus getting my piece out of harm's way. And this would actually be really, really strong for me, because my opponent would probably recapture with the bishop, opening up this check with the queen, which would be much more devastating as a result. So, so far, moving this bishop here seems like a good option. However, a specific line is not good until you've decided that every single possible counterplay your opponent is going to make is actually not going to be better than the outcomes of another move. It's a question of opportunity cost. You can't assume that your opponent is going to play this knight move. It's a bad move. You should never assume that your opponent's going to play a bad move. You should always assume that your opponent's going to play the best move possible. And we don't know if this is the best move possible. What other moves could they make? my opponent could come here with the bishop. If my opponent comes here with the bishop, we suddenly are in the situation where we have two pieces being attacked. So we would actually have to trade this piece off, which would result in a trade of material and then most likely a retreating of the knight. So in that situation, it is a better situation for black than moving the knight. So moving the bishop to block on e7 in this instance would be much better than playing knight f6. So we would assume that at the very least, bishop e7 is way better than bishop f6, and we don't have to worry about bishop f6 appearing on the board. Now that we've decided that, we have to continue searching. We need to keep looking for that optimal scenario because our opponent could also move their queen. They can move their queen to this space. This space is not safe. This space is safe. So we essentially have two spaces here where the opponent could move their queen to get out of harm's way here and to d7 and d5 respectfully. So let's see, how does this situation pan out on either of those squares? The knight is still threatened. The bishop is no longer threatened. However, if the opponent's queen does come to d5, there are some interesting shenanigans here that they can play. For instance, if you look at this line where the queen comes here to d5, we retreat. There's almost a tactic right here, but the bishop is able to cover the space. So that is one interesting lateral thought to keep an eye on. So bishop d5 does seem like an interesting move here. We still have this knight that's hanging, which we have to deal with. So that is an excellent question for us to solve. So how do I like this compared to the other situations? But I already figured out that queen h5 is not good. And we actually, I know that queen h5 isn't good because one of the other things that makes a lot of sense when you are researching a position in an opening is you actually use a thing called if you come here to the share option built into chess.com, you go over to the PNG, there's something called an FEN notation. And this FEN notation allows you to quickly import a position into an analysis board. So if we come over here to Lichess, note I do have the computer turned off because this is a game where that matters. We have actually a Lichess database of all of the moves played in this position. And in this database, we actually see that queen h5 has an extremely low win rate because you end up hanging the pawn after you end up hanging both of your pieces on pre. Both the knight and the queen are in threatened position. So in general, what we can see is that people have played bishop g5 here, and the most common result to bishop g5 is bishop e7. We don't see the third move is typically queen d5. And note, these are in terms of popularity, not in terms of strength. So one thing that you need to be aware of when you're looking through these opening tree databases is that if there is a tactic that people commonly fall for, there will still be a bunch of popular, it will still get used a lot in terms of this database because this database, I think, brings in all of the games. Regardless, you can choose your average rating, you can choose your specific time controls if you want to restrict it. But say I want to restrict it so that it's a little bit higher level, and if I want to get rid of blitz games, let's go all set there, see how this modifies. Now we see with this setup, we see that knight g3 is still our highest move. And you can see that uh, we have a really, really high percentage in terms of what they say the games are overall. There's about 1,100 games where people have played knight g3, and then right after that it goes knight g5. So those were the very next moves that we were going to take a look at. So let's take a look at knight g3 and knight g5. We've already looked at the non-knight moves in this position that seem reasonable. So now let's take a look at all of the other moves. What this has kind of indicated to us is that our instincts about this position and at night and play the play of pawn to f5 seems really unsound here, mainly because they've opened up their king and they've made their king really, really weak to attacks of all kinds. So now we need to find a way to bust this open, and that's the next step. So our possible knight moves are here, 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 and here, and here. So obviously, these are the illegal knight moves. This knight move is not wise at all. That knight move is not wise at all. So that gives us four options that we need to analyze through. Let's talk about the interesting options related to each of these. Now, if this knight comes here, this actually gives us some interesting options in terms of pawn structure. If the opponent immediately trades the bishop for the knight, we are now not up in exchange, but typically speaking, people like knights more, or people like bishops more than knights. The longer the game goes on, the more open that the game becomes. Bishops are typically seen as a stronger piece when you are in a non-closed game of chess. This scenario is interesting. This would involve a capture and probably some interesting queenside pawn structure shenaniganery inside of the French Open. I don't know that I like this idea necessarily, but it is not the worst idea. Also here, the opponent could go to fianchetto their bishop immediately, and this actually brings up an interesting point of a interesting knight transfer, because we could use the c5 square to transfer from here to here to here and seek out the outpost on e5. Now, we are not required to seek the outpost on e5 through this means. There's actually a lot of ways that we could go after this outpost. We could go jumping here, 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 d2 to f3, so on and so forth, and that seems fine as well. So this is definitely a very interesting position, definitely a very interesting scenario. The two that we have not gone through yet are the two highest played ones, the most popular played moves in this position per Lichess for people who are rated 1600 and over. So these are also what I feel are probably going to be stronger options for myself. So I have to choose between knight g3 and knight g5. So what are the benefits? If we go knight g5, we have the ability to bring this bring our knight to f3 to support it. Might get we are applying pressure here on this pawn, which is only guarded once, which is an intriguing scenario. We could try to bring our bishop out to c4 to try to hit that pawn doubly, but I think that this is ultimately going to be a little too slow. And the reason I think it's going to be a little too slow is I think our opponent is just going to play something along the lines of h6 to kick the knight, or maybe even this bishop move to apply enough pressure here that the knight has to retreat. And the knight would then have to retreat either to the h3 square or the f3 square. And the f3 square, this is where we want to develop this knight to our kingside knight. So chances are we would have to remove this from the g5 square to the h6 square. And then if we're looking at maybe developing this out again from h6, we would be looking at jumping the knight into f4, which is an interesting idea, and it seems fine. Let's take a look at our final option, which is the most popularly played move on Lichess, which is knight to g3. Knight to g3 is pretty simple. It's pretty interesting. It gives us an extremely strong formation here in the center. It allows us to develop our knight out. It gives us some interesting sacrificial options in the future, especially if we end up with a queen facing at our opponent's king side. We still have the ability to bring our bishop out to any of either d3 or c4, depending on how we think it's going to be the most powerful. We could even go out to b5 and, kind of get our opponent's hackles up by pinning this knight. So yeah, knight g3 seems like the generally most solid option of play here in this position. If I had to choose between my options, I would probably go with g3 as my primary candidate move. Excuse me, had to yawn there. Okay, so I think knight g3 is going to be the primary move that we look here. Let's take a look back on my chess at what the most common responses are here in knight g3. The most common response is knight f6, although sometimes bishop d6 is made. That's an interesting one because this actually feels like the type of move that this opponent would make, to be honest. Kind of a superficial attack there. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting one. But with knight f6, it's a series. It looks like just a series of regular developing moves. Once again, there goes knight d6, knight c4, and I imagine castles is the next thing that black does. And actually, this eval bar for black it's not an eval bar, but black loses about 30% of these games due to how weak this pawn structure is. This backwards pawn is really, really bad. Yeah, it's not a good pawn. So it is a very interesting scenario. I think I'm gonna go with knight g3. Sadly, there were no wild tactics here for me to take advantage of, but we did kind of determine that our gut through enough research. Our gut is telling us that this move is bad. And when we went online into Lichess and we looked at a games database of all the players who've ever played it, and we filtered out everybody below my rating, the white has like a 70% win rate. In this opening, somewhere between 60 and 70%, depending on how they respond to my responses. So I'm going to go with knight g3 here. I hope you enjoyed this explanation and analysis video as I ponder through this opening, of which I know that I don't know that much about it, but I do know a lot about opening theory and strategy around the game of chess. So I hope you enjoyed this analysis video. All the best.